Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership, CFBNP, and the National Cemetery Administration Scheduling Office. My name is True Lester Pauling. I am the Senior Outreach Specialist in CFBNP. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the right of the screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. The presentation is not available, but a slide with links and resources will be made provided to everyone that registered and joined this webinar today. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Mr. J. Dalrymple for this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership, who will provide today's welcoming remarks. Reverend Washington serves as the Director, and he retired from the United States Marine Corps with 20 years of active duty service with a combat tour in 2004 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom II. Reverend Washington is an ordained non-denominational minister in the Christian faith and actively serving. He received his master's degree of divinity in pastoral studies from Moody Theological Seminary, master's of arts in business management from the University of Redlands, and a bachelor's of science degree in education from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Reverend Washington.
Thank you, True. I appreciate it. Thank you for your wonderful words of encouragement and welcoming remarks as well to our guests. Appreciate you. Appreciate everyone on the team of the Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, and I will call you all out by name today, Nicholas Walters and William Morales. So thank my team. It's three of us, or four of us all together, and I just want you all to know publicly that I appreciate what you all do day in and day out as we serve veterans indirectly in what we do, and sometimes directly as we go out. And thank all of you for joining us as well, because as I always mention, you could have chosen to be many places, but you chose to be with us, and I appreciate it. And I believe today you will be blessed by our guest speaker, Jay Dalrymple. We appreciate you, Jay, the employee, very knowledgeable in this subject, and this subject is important. A lot of times, and oftentimes, we don't want to discuss those things that are kind of doom and gloom, but it's really not doom and gloom, it's planning. And based on veterans having benefits, this is an opportunity for many veterans and family members and caregivers to set things up for veterans that will be helpful. So with many things going on, I will kind of keep my comments short, but thank you again for joining us. And just please know that as we transition to the next administration, this office will be here. I will be here as long as I can to support you and veterans. And so thank all of you for joining us. And please share the good news that we have these webinars each month, 3 to 4. And so we want you to continue to tune in and join us. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reverend Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. J. Dalrymple, Director of the National Cemetery Administration Scheduling Office, who will provide today's presentation. Please read a summary of his bio on the screen. Mr. Dalrymple has been the Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office and Deputy Director of Field Programs since October 13, 2019. He is responsible for all scheduling and eligibility activities, including pre-need determinations for veterans and family members. Mr. Dalrymple graduated in 2019 from the National Cemetery Administration Comprehensive Year-Long Cemetery Director Intern Program. Mr. Dalrymple is an Air Force veteran. Now I give you Mr. J. Dalrymple for today's presentation. Jay?
Thank you very much, True Lester, and thank you, Mr. Washington, for the opportunity. And thanks to everyone that has joined today. I really appreciate the privilege to talk with you about it. Let's kind of talk a little bit about NCA and kind of what we do. So for those who may be unfamiliar with the National Cemetery Administration, the VA operates 155 national cemeteries multiple soldiers' lots, and other monument sites in a total of 42 states and Puerto Rico. There are more than 4 million Americans, including veterans of every war and conflict, buried in our national cemeteries. But in addition to that, NCA also works with our grant-funded state veteran cemeteries that support us as well. So when we look across, and we have 277 state, tribal, and national cemeteries, not to include the Army and other DoD sources, that's quite significant. And when we look at our burial benefits, each of us that are veterans, we've earned these benefits through our service, sacrifice to our nation. And as the director of the scheduling office, it's very important to me. So the scheduling office was established to support our veterans and their family members, as you go through the difficult times in your life of burying a loved one. For us, almost all the requests for burial in a national cemetery comes through my organization now at the scheduling office. So today, I want to talk about a number of important topics for you, and hopefully this will help you in your planning as you look to plan the potential resting places for you and your loved ones that are eligible. We're going to talk a little bit about high-level eligibility, requirements, what's in a burial benefit. Let's go through some of the frequently asked questions, talk about what makes a person eligible, and then talk about the pre-need program that's available to you to help you with planning your end of life so that your family has less stress and can focus on what's important with the rest of the family. So let's proceed and go through the presentation and see where we go from here. First, I want to talk about burial benefits that are included in burials at a national cemetery. We have a number of benefits that are available to veterans and their eligible loved ones. The first is obviously having a grave site in any cemetery, as long as it has available space that can perform casket or cremation burials. Again, that's subject to availability of those services at an open cemetery. Second, we look at a grave liner or a vault. This is very interesting. Many families don't know that the National Cemetery Administration provides that vault for you at no charge. So that's an important piece to remember, because there is money associated with that as you look at other options available to you. Then we also provide opening and closing of the grave site, and then perpetual care of the site going forward. As you'll see in our national cemeteries, we call them national shrines, because that's really what it is, honoring our veterans and their loved ones each and every day, taking care of their sites. Next would be government headstone, marker, or niche cover. There are multiple terms. A niche cover is one that pertains to a columbarium wall where we're placing cremains. So depending on your choice of a casketed in-ground or a wall burial, will determine what kind of marker you receive. Next, we'll talk about burial flags available at the service, presidential memorial certificate signed by the current sitting president is presented to the family as well. And then another service that's not included as part of the burial benefit but our military honors. And the scheduling office will assist you and provide contact information to the family so that you can schedule military honors for your veteran at the time of their interment. Some of the family responsibilities we always like to say, once you hit the gates of a national cemetery, everything inside the gate is free to the family. But there are some family responsibilities and costs associated with the preparation or services prior to coming into the gate. Some of those may be pertaining to either cremation services or preparation of the body or the remains for a casketed service, which would include cost of a casket or urn, transportation to the cemetery, if there's any storage fees. So if we schedule you out a week, the funeral home may have some storage costs if it's a casketed burial. And then there are other costs associated for obtaining a gravesite if you were to look at a private cemetery instead of a national cemetery. If you do choose to go to a private cemetery instead, there are different benefits and allowances available to veterans and their family members. And that contact information is at VBA at the 800-827-1000 number shown on the slide. So those are the primary family responsibilities before even getting the loved one to the national cemetery. One of the things that we found beneficial is to talk about some of the frequently asked questions that we've received over the last few years in doing these presentations. So we want to go through some of these first, give you some idea of some questions you may have already had and some of the answers. First question, can I be buried at any national cemetery? The answer is yes. Veterans and their eligible dependents can be buried in any national cemetery as long as it has available grave sites. So there's no geographical restrictions. If you live in New York and you pass away in New York and your loved ones are on the West Coast, they can coordinate and have you placed at a cemetery in California instead of New York. It doesn't matter. We will provide you a gravesite and give you the ceremonies and the perpetual care that you deserve. Next question is the spouse required to be buried in the same national cemetery as the veteran? That is no. They can choose to be buried separately. We see this periodically where families have relocated and maybe their veteran is buried in one location, but mom was in a different state or whatever, and they can be interred at two different national cemeteries. In regards to a spouse, will the spouse be buried next to me or with me in the same gravesite? And this is going to depend. So if the spouse is not a veteran, they will be interred in the same gravesite with the veteran spouse as well. If they're both veterans and they both served and they're both eligible on their own service, what we do at the National Cemetery Administration is we do what's called a set aside, which is an adjacent gravesite that's set aside for the surviving spouse, and then based on their eligibility, they can be interred right next to them if they choose that, or they can be interred in the same gravesite. That's ultimately a family decision, but we'll want to know that as the first loved one is interred. Next question, does it matter if I'm in a casket or cremains? That's going to depend on the site. So not all national cemeteries are open to all services. Some may be full for caskets and only doing cremains. NCA has put together a number of initiatives where we have rural initiatives or urban initiatives that may only have columbarium walls. So it's really going to depend on the cemetery that you choose and what kind of remains that we can inter at that time. Next question, does National Cemetery Administration manage Arlington? That answer is no. So Arlington is managed by the Department of the Army, and inquiries should be directed to Arlington directly. We do here at NCA and actually at the scheduling office have a great working relationship with Arlington, and we can assist and provide you guidance there if you choose to go to Arlington for a burial. Some more questions. Is my wife listed on the or spouse listed on the headstone also? Yes. So traditionally, the veteran information is placed on the front of the headstone, and the spouse's information is presented on the back of the headstone. Can I get a headstone if I'm created? Yes. A headstone or marker is required for all remain types. So if you choose to be interred in a national cemetery, every single grave site will be marked as soon as that burial occurs. So very similar there. Are there any costs to have my spouse buried? So we talked a little bit about what the family responsibilities are. Again, those costs are responsible by the family for funeral home and other expenses. Once you hit the gates of VA National Cemetery, all of the additional costs are incurred by us, and there's no charge to you. Can I request just a service and military honors if I'm not being interred in a national cemetery? Yes. So we have what's called a memorial service, where families have chosen to have a burial in a private or a different cemetery. Maybe they're buried at sea, but they still want to have a gathering and memorialize their loved ones. We can do that at the National Cemetery. You're allotted time for a service and have military honors rendered at the cemetery or shelter, even though you're not having an interment at that national cemetery. What is the difference between in-ground cremation burial and being placed in a columbarium wall? Very similar. Casket obviously goes in-ground. You can do in-ground cremation burials, very similar to a traditional burial, where we are placing that urn in the gravesite, similar to a casket. Otherwise, the columbarium or the wall contains niches that we can place remains in as well, as long as they fit that size of that niche. Otherwise, they'll be required to go in ground. Another question. If you're 100% service connected, what will the VA cover if buried in a national cemetery? So NCA is a little unique in that it doesn't matter whether you're 100% service connected or 0% and just served your tour and got out. Every single one of those products are available for any of our veterans. Doesn't matter if you're service connected or not, enlisted or an officer, you get the same benefits available to you. So grave site, the vault, opening and closing of the grave, headstone, burial, flag, and presidential memorial certificate. Next question, does the VA help to pay to reserve a gravesite at an outside private cemetery? So if a family chooses to bury their loved one in a private cemetery, all of those costs would be associated with the family and their responsibility. However, NCA does provide government headstones, and there's an application process for that. Again, service eligibility requirements to be determined eligible, and then a headstone can be ordered from there. Is there a time limit for requesting burial? My husband's cremated remains were not placed in a national cemetery at his time of passing 3 years ago. Am I still able to apply? There are no time limits. We have had families that have held their loved ones for 5, 10, 20 years and have finally made that decision to inter their loved one in a national cemetery. Maybe they were waiting for their spouse so they could be buried together at any time. So if the family has held remains, they can contact us at any time, request a burial, whether it's the individual veteran or the veteran and maybe the spouse want to be placed at the same time, contact us and we can get that coordinated and scheduled for you. Next question. My dad and I are both veterans, so we need two separate 40-10007 forms. Those are pre-need applications, and another one for my mother, correct? So we're going to talk a little bit about pre-need applications and what they're used for. And that form 40-10007, we do need to have one for each individual who's applying for that determination, whether it's a veteran, spouses. There may be some others that we'll talk about as far as unmarried adult children that can apply as well. Can you use your VA award letter with all the information on it to apply for a pre-need determination? We're going to look for your discharge docs, whether it's a 214, a DD 214, or other older documents that are available for us to determine your eligibility. We are going to look at any service-connected ratings of 0% or greater. So it may, even though it's indicated on the award letter, we're going to use that. We're going to locate your information in a VA system and find your actual discharge for you and make determination off of that as well. So it's very useful if you have that. Please keep that on hand, and you can submit that to the scheduling office when the time occurs. I'm going to change direction a little bit now and talk headstone and marker information. So there's always a lot of questions about what goes on the headstone and what's provided and who provides it. So on a headstone in a traditional national cemetery, state veteran, tribal cemetery, or even in a private cemetery, there are certain pieces of information that needs to be included on the headstone. We need to have the individual's legal name, the veteran's branch of service, beginning and ending years of a person's life, so date of birth, date of death. And then in a state and national cemetery, we actually put the gravesite information, so the section and the gravesite number on the back of the stone for identification purposes. Now, that's the minimum requirements that we have that need to go on the headstone. As an individual, you can choose to make some adjustments. You'll see in the picture where it shows January 20th, so it has the day and month of birth as well as death, highest rank that they've attained, and then any valor awards and war service periods can be placed on there as well. And then at the top, an emblem of belief for your own personal beliefs. We have almost 80 different emblems of belief that are available for individuals to choose from. And then you can see at the bottom 3 lines, we call those additional inscriptions, that the family has the opportunity to put terms of endearment, maybe nicknames, other information that they want to share on the headstone for their loved one. And if you're being buried in a national or a state cemetery, the cemetery will work with you on the formatting and the information on the headstone or marker as you go along. So as your service occurs, the family's going to or the cemetery is going to hand you a packet of information, and one of them is the format for the headstone itself. But that at least provides you with information on what's minimally required and then what additional options are available to the family. All right, let's turn the page and let's talk about eligibility for burial in a national cemetery. So who is eligible for burial? It's not for everybody. We specifically focus on veterans, active duty service members, spouses, and dependents may be eligible for burial in the national, as well as some other benefits, but they have to meet one of these requirements. So they has to be a veteran who didn't receive a dishonorable discharge, or a service member who died while on active duty, maybe active duty for training or inactive duty for training, or are the spouse or a minor child of a veteran, even if the veteran died first, or potentially in some cases, we talk about unmarried adult dependent children of the veteran as well. Those are the folks that are eligible for burial at a national cemetery. So let's talk about what's the definition of a veteran, because there are a number of them out there, but the legal definition as defined in Title 38 United States Code 101, a veteran is a person who served in the active military, naval, or air service and was discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. So there's a lot of questions around guard and reservists and what does that mean, because it's not active military, and we'll talk a little bit more about eligibility for them here in a little bit. You can also visit the website link in va.gov under burial and memorials for eligibility information on the websites. So let's talk about some of the persons that are eligible and some of the common categories that we look at. So the laws changed in 1980. So on or before September 7th, 1980, an enlisted member only had to serve 1 or more days of active duty service to be deemed eligible for burial in a national cemetery. For officers, that date was October 16th of 1981. So anyone that served in a regular component on or before these dates are eligible for burial in a national cemetery. As the laws changed, so after September 7th, 1980 and October 16th, 1981 for officers, now there became a requirement for a 24-month minimum active service requirement. So you have to serve 2 years to be eligible for burial. So that's a big change from 1980 when it was 1 day. Now you got to serve 2 months. Excuse me. So there are also some other pieces that may be applicable, whether there was an early out or a hardship, or discharged or released for a disability, service connected, and was later determined to have a service connection. There are a number of different variables. So if you're an individual in one of those states where maybe you didn't serve 24 months consecutively, we're going to talk to you specifically about applying for pre-need that can help us with that eligibility determination upfront in advance of your time of need, so that you can make the proper planning with your family based on that decision. Some other common categories that we talk about: veterans that have a pensionable or compensable status, or service connected. So if you're retired, service connected, and have a disability rating of 0% or higher, you're eligible for burial. So you may submit a pre-need application and you're going through looking at service connection disabilities at the time. You may not be eligible up front, but then if you get a service connection rating of 0% or greater, that automatically makes that trigger so that you're eligible for interment in a national cemetery. Some other categories as we talk about spouses: a spouse or an unremarried surviving spouse of a veteran, or individual considered to have obtained veteran status. There are a number of different laws around that. But there's also for spouses that have remarried, those surviving spouses, but the death that occurred before January 1st of 2000, another critical date before the law changed, where they remarried a non-veteran and they want to be placed with their first spouse, the veteran that passed. That remarriage must have been terminated by a divorce or by death of the non-veteran, in order to be eligible. So at the scheduling office, we will walk through all of those different scenarios with you and assist you with any questions you may have. Some of the other common reasons for denial, dishonorable for VA purposes, active duty for training, again, Guard and Reserve, time, and maybe you served your full 6-year enlistment, only did active duty for training, did not have any executive orders, presidential orders activating you for active duty in a Title 10 status. It is significant. So if you're in the Guard or Reserve, have questions about whether you're eligible or not, please reach out to us. And then, as we talked about, less than 24 months after September 7th, 1980 for enlisted. And then a number of other common reasons for denial there. So let's talk a little bit about pre-need eligibility for burial. So National Cemetery Administration has a pre-need program that you can apply for in advance as you're still living to determine if you can be buried in a VA National Cemetery. This is called a pre-need determination of eligibility. And we offer this to help make the burial planning process easier for your family members, reduce the stress as the veteran has passed. And when we talk about pre-need, means before the time of need, before the time of death. So again, this is another planning tool for burial in advance for your family to reduce the stress as much as we can. One important piece to note is if an individual is in hospice or has a set time, or a loved one has passed already, a pre-need application is not required for burial at the time of need. So if a loved one is close, and we see it frequently where they'll submit a pre-need application and their loved one's in hospice and the doctors have given them, say, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months to live, we're not going to treat it as a pre-need application. We want to establish that case up front for you. So a pre-need determination is not needed for burial in the National Cemetery Administration. Some other things around the pre-need program when we talk about eligibility. So the pre-need program is specific to VA National Cemeteries only. It does not account for state or veteran cemeteries. Many of those do have similar programs, but you have to reach out to that cemetery directly for more details. The second thing that's important is, even though you're applying for a pre-need and we're going to ask you, hey, what cemetery are you potentially looking at? So you put the cemetery in. This does not reserve a gravesite. This really is, am I eligible? And because hopefully everybody lives 50 years or more after your pre-need application submitted, that cemetery may get filled up and we have to close it, and we may open a new cemetery somewhere in that general area. So it doesn't reserve a gravesite in that cemetery that's now closed, because we want to ensure that we're placing our veterans who have passed timely. Third thing, looking at approval status may change, and as we get to time of need where the veteran or the family member has passed, we're going to go back and re-verify everything to make sure that nothing has changed that could affect your eligibility. For the program itself, we want to look at recommended applicants who we want to submit a pre-need application for. So we talk about an unmarried adult child, a child, maybe an adult who's physically or mentally disabled, and VA determines them as a helpless child. We want to know about those so we can have everything prepped and ready to go for them. Another one we talked a little bit earlier, reservists who are unsure if their service qualifies for burial benefits. And then any veterans, family members, or others with questions regarding their specific eligibility, or surviving remarried spouses of previously interred veterans. Those are the key ones that the pre-need program really does help benefit. As a veteran myself, knowing that I served my full enlistment, I was honorably discharged, I meet that greater than 24 months. I don't need to have a pre-need application submitted because I know I'm eligible. If I retired from the service, and I'm drawing a retirement check, you're good. So we want to really reach out and look at the individuals that may have some questions on their eligibility, or for other family members that may be eligible. So what information do you need to apply? You'll need a number of things that are important to help us identify if we need to find discharge papers for you. Your social security number, date, place of birth, any of your military service history, if you have service dates, rank. Most things are commonly found on a DD 214 discharge. So if you have the discharge papers, perfect. We want to see those, which will help us get you an answer quickly. So if you're applying as a spouse or a surviving spouse, we'll also need some personal information regarding them, including their social security number. Because what we're going to do is we're going to link the veteran and the spouse and children together, because the veteran actually has the benefit, and then bring in the spouse and any unmarried adult children, and tie those to that specific veteran, so we know they're all together and eligible based on the veteran's service. Another question, if you're applying on behalf of someone else, there may be additional supporting documents that we'll need to get to ensure that you have the authority to apply for that person. Some of them you can get from the VSOs if they're assisting you, or if you're the individual that are representing that veteran or that potential eligible family member. The pre-need application itself can be kind of cumbersome. It is broken out into different sections to really capture the information for the veteran, then for the claimant, because the claimant could be the veteran, a spouse, or for a unmarried adult child. So broken out into different sections. So the first thing we're going to look at is section 1. You're going to choose the VA National Cemetery where you prefer to be buried. Again, doesn't guarantee a gravesite reservation, does not apply to Arlington National Cemetery as they work for the Department of the Army. This is only for national cemeteries that VA manages. Second step, you're going to gather that supporting documentation and information that you need to fill out the application. When we talk about terms, the term is a claimant. You're the claimant requesting that determination. However, you're going to have veteran information, then you're going to have the claimant. If the claimant is not the veteran, we want you to sign on the form itself for you as an individual. So as we go along, we talk about section 1, and that's the veteran or the service member. We're going to ask for their name, address, periods of service, social security number. They may have a military service number that may be different. We're going to ask demographics, date of birth, place of birth, other information, date of death if it's applicable. If, say, the veteran has passed and is already placed to rest, and it's a family member, we still need to know that information. So if they have passed, that helps us locate that individual. And then further information: are they married? What's their military status? Are they a veteran? Are they retired? Did they die on active duty? Information around their branches of service. They may have one more or more branches of service. We want to see both of those, because then we can make a determination, but then also have this information available for their headstone in the future. Section 2 is the claimant information. This is the individual that's submitting the claim or requesting a determination. Again, the claimant can be the veteran, or the claimant could be a spouse or an unmarried adult child. So filling out this information, providing the name, how they're related. Is it the veteran themselves? Is it a surviving spouse, unmarried adult child, or other? And then what's the address and information about you individually, your social security number, date of birth, any maiden names if you're a married spouse. Another one that's important that can be very helpful, it's optional, but is if you have an email address, that really helps make things easier as we go along with the cemetery in communicating different pieces of information going forward. So the big thing to remember: section 2 is the claimant. I'm the person that's submitting the application, so I want to know about myself, but I may or may not be the veteran. And then section 3, certification and signature. Again, we want you to sign and date it, and then identify if it's you and yourself, or you're signing on behalf of the claimant. Maybe it's an unmarried adult child that is incompetent or unable to sign for themselves. Then complete the rest of the information there. So how do I apply for a pre-need application? There are really 3 different ways. You can do it directly off the website as shown. That is a preferred method. And the reason we prefer that is because it's easier to read typing than it is handwritten forms. And it goes into the system automatically and does a whole bunch of things on the back end. You can submit a paper application either through postal mail or fax. One of the biggest things that we're going to ask from each of you, if you're submitting an application, providing the supporting documentation at the time that you submit the application. That can be a discharge document. If you're a spouse, a copy of a marriage certificate. If you're an unmarried adult child that you're submitting on behalf of, dependency statements, any medical information, anything that can help us identify what the status of that individual is, so we can go look for those records. And then what happens after I apply? So our goal is to complete your application within 120 days upon receipt. Many times, and this is exactly why, if a person is in hospice or death is imminent, to not submit a pre-need application. Just call us and we will establish a case and prepare for future burial in a national. But we're gonna complete your application with 120 days. We're gonna send you an information packet via the Postal Service. Once we've reviewed your application and made a final determination on your eligibility. So we request that you wait that 120 days. We're going to get it to you hopefully sooner. Right now, we're about 90 days out, but we continue to strive and drive that number down as much as we can. But after that 120 days, if you haven't heard anything, here's the number to call, the 800-535-1117. That is the main number to the scheduling office. And option 4 is for our pre-need team. And our pre-need team is here Monday through Friday, 8 to 5:30 Eastern time. Please, please, please wait to hear back on your application rather than resubmitting. You can call and check on the status is better, but if you resubmit, then we start getting into taking more time away from being able to process applications for others. So that is the presentation. Let's go to some of the questions that have come in.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dalrymple. I appreciate that so much. That wealth of information, always so important and informative. So we do have a couple of questions, Jay, in the Q&A box. We do have one question from Amy Wernicki, and she wants to know, does active duty have to be during a period of declared war?
That answer is no. If you served during peacetime, you still served honorably. Doesn't matter, doesn't have to be during wartime. If you served in a branch of service on active duty, you would be eligible.
Thank you. Second question comes from Miss Diane, and her question is, how many character spaces are allowed in the 3 lines on the headstone?
So for additional inscription, it's going to depend on the headstone, whether it's an upright marble or granite. If a person is being interred in a private cemetery, it may be a flat bronze marker. It's going to depend on the cemetery. So the number of lines differ depending on the headstone that's available for you. But I'll tell you, if the plan is to go to a national cemetery, they're going to work with you based on their individual cemetery requirements and work with you for that additional inscription. It can be up to like 33 characters total, or it could be more or less, depending on again, the situation with the headstone.
Thank you so much, Jay. And lastly, one more question from Ms. Diane. If my veteran spouse has 2 ex-wives, are both of them unmarried individuals eligible to apply for burial?
So great question. If a veteran's spouse passes before the veteran does, and we have proof of marriage to the veteran at the time of passing, they can be placed. We have seen it where the veteran is still living and maybe they remarried multiple times. Each time they would be eligible for burial. Now, the difference is if a family is divorced and the veteran is still living, the divorced spouse no longer is eligible for burial with that veteran's service. So it can depend on whether the spouse passes first. If the spouse is due, and we can link that they were married at the time of death, they can be interred. But if the veteran, if the family divorces before the veteran passes, the spouse is no longer eligible.
It makes sense to me. And one more question here. Question 4 from Rose Shadwell. What was the 1800 number, please? And also, how has the ongoing situation with the Middletown Cemetery affected long-term plans for veterans burials?
So first, let's go with the first part, the 800 number that is on the screen right now, 800-535-1117. That is to the scheduling office, and there will be 4 different options available. When it comes time for interment, or you're ready to schedule a burial, option 1 is for burials. Option 2, if you're Spanish speaking and you need a bilingual agent to assist with setting up that case. And then option 3 is for our eligibility department. If additional review needs to occur on the individual looking to be interred, our eligibility team will take that piece and continue to get records and what are their information to make a good determination. And then option 4 is for our pre-need program. Now, as far as the situation at Middletown Cemetery, I'm not sure where that is. I think that may be a state veteran cemetery. If that's the case, the states handle things a little bit differently. So you'd have to ask them if they have plans for expansions or whatever. A lot of our state veteran cemeteries, VA provides, has a cemetery grant program that will help with their expansions and continue to provide burial services for our veterans. But it may be cemetery specific.
All right, that is the last question. Mr. Dalrymple, thank you again for your support of this webinar and for all the wealth of information that you provided. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks.
Thanks, True. Jay, thank you, my brother. We appreciate you. We know that every time when you get on, you take away from your work, so we know that you're very busy. But again, thank you for taking time, and thank all of you for joining us today. And as a reminder to each of you, we have these webinars each month. And another reminder, part of our team, Ms. Celeste Pauling, will be representing the VA and the Center for Faith this weekend in Chesapeake, Virginia. So please go to our website and look at our calendar so you can tell someone you can come out. So take care of yourselves and be blessed.
Thank you, Mr. Reverend Washington. If you registered for this event, we will provide you with links and resources Jay spoke about today in his presentation. A recording of this webinar will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and sharing of information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Have a safe and wonderful day. Goodbye.